see all these familiar faces.
Interest. Are you on this panel? Yeah.
Same people every year.
Good. Louis, you want to come here? All right.
Who are you?
Okay, guys. Well, thank you for joining and for the warm welcome. So today we'll be chatting about institutional staking and the regulatory issues that stakers are facing, and especially the outlook for 2025. Actually, this panel is very topical. Obviously, with the election, things will be changing in the US. That's one thing we'll be addressing during the panel. So I'm Adrian. I head BD for PwC out of Hong Kong for digital assets. And I'll be your moderator today. Tress, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Zackon. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Tress Finance. We help companies manage all their back office when it comes to crypto data, so accounting, audit, compliance. At the moment, we are also introducing frameworks of how to go through MiCA and VARA for many crypto companies, and working with most of the panel already on these issues, and great to be here.
Thank you.
Hey, my name is Brian. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Course One. So we're one of the first and leading staking companies. We work with we support around 65 different protocols. We work with lots of VC funds, custodians, and yeah.
Thank you. Louis.
Hi, I'm Louis Hahn from Coinbase. I'm the head of staking sales, head of developer sales as well, part of Coinbase's developer platform. So that incorporates our non-custodial staking infrastructure business, as well as selling across institutional clients at Coinbase Institutional.
Thank you, Louis. Eric? And yeah, Louis is actually on the panel despite all appearances.
And my name's Eric. I'm a lawyer. I've been with Lido. I mainly do policy and engagement with regulators in all sorts of jurisdictions these days.
Thank you, Eric. So there are further panels that will be focusing on some jurisdictions. So this panel will be more high level on the outlook globally, and also the current trends and the ways staking providers are addressing challenges in the space. So then additional panels will delve in specific jurisdictional issues. So we'll start with the regulatory environment for staking. So I think the first question we need to ask ourselves is really how we describe the current environment for staking and what's actually very topical for next year. And also, what are any recent changes that are impacting the businesses of our panelists? So maybe I'll start with you, Brian, Louis, Eric, and then Tal.
Sure, yeah. I mean, so far, right, I think non-custodial staking is, not regulated, I think, anywhere, or, and generally, right, the places that get regulated is where custody happens, right, so where people actually have control over the assets. Of course, sometimes with like smart contracts, maybe there's like some ambiguity, but in general, I think staking is not regulated at this point. Actually, I think after this, there's a presentation from Yves from Bitcoin Suisse, and in Switzerland last year, there was rumors that they were going to say, oh, staking is going to be covered under banking regulation. Only banks can do staking. In the end, they decided not to do that after a lot of pushback. I mean, that could have been a big problem for us, right? As well as everyone else who deals with crypto in Switzerland, because we are a Swiss company. And they ended up then actually explicitly putting out a definition, the regulator of, okay, non-custodial staking, it's not regulated. Even custodial staking, I think if you have like segregated assets, not being regulated. So I think the regulations really comes in more with on the custody side. And of course, it comes in now. It's a big topic when it comes to, for example, ETFs and how can ETFs stake. And then in terms of the future, who knows, right? I think it's still pretty uncertain. Obviously, I hope that the current state prevails and staking doesn't become regulated. I think it will be a huge problem for the entire industry and for crypto in general if, running a staking node on some proof-of-stake network is something that not just anyone can do anymore. But I think so far, still, I think we have the fortunate situation, right? That I think there's not really restrictive regulations on staking anywhere.
Thanks. So I think, Louis, you will have a different view since Coinbase is not purely a technology provider. It's an exchange facing consumers, and that is very often harassed by various regulatory agencies. So maybe you'll have some views on what you have been seeing in the space in terms of regulatory enforcement, how Coinbase has been dealing with it, to the extent you can disclose.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree with him. In terms of like non-custodial staking, that's not something that's been in the eyes of like the regulator as something that they've come after Coinbase for example, right? We operate our own infrastructure business for staking, and that's separate from offering staking to end users that are using Coinbase Exchange. And then we do also have a regulated entity, Coinbase Prime, Coinbase Institutional, that is regulated by NYDFS. And we offer institutional cold storage custody of Ethereum as well as other things. And clients are actually able to stake as institutional clients out of that regulated entity. But kind of to his point, what we've been kind of dealing with the SEC with in terms of staking is that they clearly called out staking through the Coinbase exchange as something that they brought a case against us for. We obviously disagree.
When was that? When was this? This was 2 years ago, right?
Yes, this was early 23.
Yeah, okay.
But it was a host of things, you're operating as an unregistered securities dealer, and so on and so forth. But to answer your question directly, the regulatory environment up to this point has been quite poor. There's just no clarity. It's been regulation by enforcement. And we've had to do a lot of policy work as a company, and I know our CEO, Brian, has spent a lot of time in DC trying to educate. We stood up standwithcrypto.org, and I think you just see it's not supposed to be a partisan issue, but there have been influential people on one side that have kind of made it a partisan issue. And what we've seen is that the country, the US in general, does see this as a nonpartisan issue. For example, standwithcrypto.org in the 2 weeks leading up to FIT21 had 400,000 people sign up to support Stand With Crypto. And then in the 1 week leading up to that vote, 40,000 Americans reached out to their legislators to let them know that it was an important issue. So that passed in the House, it's in review in the Senate, and as we go through the conversation, I'm sure we can talk about like how do we think this is going to change in the future.
Sure, thank you. So Eric.
Yeah, I think there's great comments by both Brian and Louis. I think that we should be cautious not to just focus on like one simple area of the law, like securities regulation, because there's other things that are on the horizon that may affect staking or staking businesses, whether they're custodial or non-custodial, at a much greater level, which is like tax and KYC, AML, and those are on the horizon, and those decisions are being made in the now. Like now is the time those rules are being examined and cooked up. And getting ahead of myself, it's always the same message to everybody, is now is the time to be engaged because the rules are being made now. So for everybody who's out there, join an association, wherever you are in Switzerland or in the United States, have somebody represent you because they're inviting people to the table to have these conversations.
Thanks for that.
If I can just add,
Yeah.
because you mentioned tax, and I think also got to do with accounting at some point. What we've seen is that there's a huge difference between rewards coming in and rewards that are up for claims, right? if there's a reward that is claimable, many times you will look at it as something that's already in your possession, and you will need to declare it as income or revenue. So that is also being taxed. I don't know if that's going to change anytime soon, but for some players, it's not the easiest thing to deal with. In addition, really understanding where the assets are coming in from, right? So you have rewards that are very clearly yours, and then you have accrued rewards that you need to understand what comes in on a daily basis and how to tax those. So I think that the regulation that will be kicking in is going to bring lots of clarity to that, and then all of us will need to comply.
Actually, this is a good segue, Tal, and we can continue on this. What jurisdictions or zone, region are you and Tres looking at? And can you tell us more about this framework?
Sure. So what we've seen, like we work across like globally. We are looking today at MICA and VARA that are going to be kicking in, and we built specifically frameworks inside the product that will help companies that need to engage with those kind of frameworks to comply very easily and kind of tick off the boxes when it comes to staking or any other financial operation that's got to do with digital assets. So it can be stable coins, it can be if you're engaging with ETFs in some way or another, then of course any kind of coins up to meme coins if needed. We also know how to guide companies on how to deal with those in different jurisdictions.
Do you see some differences between jurisdictions, like the approach?
So I think
maybe you guys can chip in also on
from what I'm seeing, it's like it's not very clear. Like everything is kind of building out. It hasn't come to practice yet. I think only in 2025 we'll be able to see, okay, these are the real differences that are happening. But at the moment, everything is sort of still in theory.
Yeah.
Yeah, and happy to chime in here. So obviously, because we operate many different parts of the business, we get to see the regulations in different jurisdictions and with different product sets work differently, right? And for example, you know, we power staking for, you know, structured products already today, just not in the United States, right? So we power 3IQ, for example, 21 shares. They use our validators. These are in ETPs that are approved today. They're just in jurisdictions like Canada and the EU. I think when you think about staking in the US, maybe I'm jumping ahead, but what we see is a lack of clarity, and I think Tal touched on that, and you touched on that as well, and I agree with them that like now is the time to start getting engaged, because I do see a pathway moving into the future, going into 2025, where we will get clarity, and the legislators need to know exactly how to adjudicate rewards, like make tax laws and so on and so forth. So I think that clarity is coming, but they need to write these guidelines and frameworks now. But I think we're going to have a much more amenable regime that is willing to engage and write those frameworks.
It was quite clear in 2023 that the US was against staking, right? They came after Coinbase and after Crain. At the time, Crain had to settle for like $30 million on those activities, and they just pulled out. I don't know, Eric, we talked about this just before we came in, what's going to happen in 2025, and if anything's going to change on that.
Well, I can't speak for Kraken, but yeah, I think there's an evolution in play no matter what. Like if you want us to just circle back into the United States, there was an evolution in play no matter what. Now, will it move faster or better? There was always going to be some clarity coming. It just may be coming sooner and a little clearer. Things are shaking out all over the world, though. Like MiCA is shaking out, becoming very clear. The UK has yet to really speak up on anything, right? But they'll be coming in shortly thereafter, and then in the US. I think engagement really needs to happen sort of at the international level. So these organizations like OECD, FATF, Bank of International Settlements, right? Because they end up with these sort of treaties that everybody just multilaterally participates in. So somebody far away, very distinct from you, can make some rule, and it may be not good for staking, for example. And so then your national authority just adopts that rule, even though it goes against like what your country's principle is. And so it's the same thing again. It's like now's the time to be engaged, because they're all listening, they're all inviting, they're inviting comments and so on. And so but the rules are going to be made in the next 24 months.
So
and
the
we're going to be
topic
stuck with them for a while.
on the topic of engagement, brings me to compliance and adaptation, how you guys actually adapt to the frameworks that are ever changing and also not very clear. I'd like to have your views and insights also for the audience on how you, just as a person, and how your organization deals with this state of affairs where things are not clear. You have to, you want to comply, you want to be, but you also want to innovate. So how does one deal with this kind of stuff as a CEO, as a founder, as a head of sales, as a GC? Brian, you want to start?
Sure, yeah, I can start. I mean, so, right, so we are not regulated, right? But we do work with other organizations, like many organizations that are regulated. And so, sort of by extension, that also has implications for us, right? Because they then have certain, requirements and expectations. So, they'll send like some sort of RFI, 100 pages, all kinds of questions, right? So, and we've done many of those. And one thing that also some of our partners required from us to do is then go through external certification. So we went through this ISO 27001 certification, which basically asks you to identify all of the risks and then have assessments of the risk and different processes to ensure those risks are managed, and you have an external audit. So we've done that. And that's also, I think, pretty reasonable because it's, it kind of allows you to define your own risks and how you deal with them,
Exactly.
within some framework. And so I do feel that, I mean, if there is some kind of regulation at some point coming that's actually kind of reasonable, I'd imagine maybe it will be something like that, right? It'll be like, oh, if you want to work with some staking providers, okay, they need to live up to some kind of risk management security standard. So I think that can be, at least if you want to be more on the institutional side, I think you have to go down some route like that. Aside from that, I think just to kind of like monitor and stay on top of what's happening somewhat, but I think it's, it's, the world is such a large place, right? Yeah. And when there is not actual regulations there, it's...
But it's interesting that actually there are no clear regulations, but that doesn't mean that there is still interest from within the industry to get certified for some standards.
I think it's just a customer requirement, right? Yeah. They're like, hey, we're only going to work with staking providers if they have, I think we've had the initial customers maybe, okay, we'll work with you guys, but you need to get this certification, within the next year or something. Mm-hmm. And, I think today it's something that, at least I think our largest competitors have that same, yep. Either that or SOC 2, but it's basically the same thing.
Gotcha. So, Eric, do you want to chime in on?
Yeah, I think people have heard me say this before, where there's confusion, there's opportunity, mm-hmm. right? So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I definitely echo Brian's comment that often the counterparty is the person who actually is looking for some type of compliance, even though it's not required. Mm-hmm. But something that people can do during a period of confusion is they can build systems that are resilient, right? So you can build a module, you can build it in such a way that that there's a weakness or a vulnerability here traditionally, but maybe I can build some technology that simply like smooths that out so that at the time when the rules are made, they can look past and say, you know what, I don't have to inject an artificial intermediary here who's going to produce, 10,000 pages of paper a day just to be compliant, just to go through the motions and say it.
Yep.
In a lot of the conversations I have this year with regulators, my message to them is often, if you're going to come up with a rule, have one side look traditional, and then have the option in this period, and have it say, either you're going to inject this intermediary here with all this compliance, or you have the option to build mm-hmm. some type of technology that obviates the need. Yeah. And it's kind of interesting to watch them perk up. They're like, oh, I don't want to say they never thought of it, but they're not against it.
I'll just add to that. So when we started the company, the idea was to help with all things accounting, audit, and compliance. And we saw that there was demand from staking providers for our kind of system, And once we started working with them, they started asking us if we can help support their customers, right? Because we're seeing lots of institutions and other companies working with staking providers, and they are asking for different reports because they need to be compliant, and they have different compliance issues that aren't crypto related. They can just
That's where
be
you come
like,
in.
yeah, exactly, for asset managers, right? So we just went out and built a new product called a Staking Data API in order for them to power their users with accurate data for their compliance requirements.
Okay. And Lewis, the reason I wanted to ask you last is because, like, I guess Coinbase has different approaches to discussing with the regulators, because you're more of an easy target. So how is and actually Tal mentioned earlier Kraken, and that Kraken actually pulled back. Coinbase didn't. So can you tell us more about the approach you've had?
Yeah, so just want to say, like, hats off to the Coinbase legal team. I think we have a very strong legal team from the top down, across commercial legal, product legal, our litigation team, and so on. I think we've taken the view that we operate within the bounds of the published laws, right? And where there is no clarity, we take a very stringent view at how we think the technology works and how that applies to the applicable laws and statutes that are available today. And then we offer the products based on that assessment, right? And in the case with the SEC, you know, we have this heavy-handed chair, Gensler, who has, you know, gone so far as to call specific tokens themselves securities, and if you take part in the act of staking itself, that's a security, and like everything's a security, right? And we fundamentally disagree with that, and we've made that known, and we're going to see that process out in the court system, right? So we're asking the judicial branch of the government to weigh in, and, you know, and that we're going to kind of see that process through. So where that has applicability, we obviously have our hands tied in certain ways, right? Like, if you are a Coinbase user in the United States and you live in certain states, for example, the staking option is not available in the app to you, right? And we even have state-by-state laws that we have to abide by, and some states have kind of made it so that, you know, they don't want to offer staking in those jurisdictions. So even on a state-by-state basis, we apply the applicable laws, but otherwise, we move forward with what we believe is the right products. And then obviously on the non-custodial side or on the institutional side, where we do have a regulator that it's approved certain products like staking through a segregated vault model, that's available, right? And we can still power clients that are in other jurisdictions and so on.
Cool. So I promised we would touch on what's happening in the U.S. And actually, I guess like what we mentioned on the adaptability on approaching regulators will be changing with the Trump election, and Gensler will probably be out of a job, open to work on LinkedIn, as some of us saw. Do you want to? So we only have one American here. Eric is Canadian, so almost. Brian, you don't live in the U.S. And you're American.
Not yet.
Yeah, it's not yet. So just kidding. So yeah, maybe that's for the future outlook. Can you tell us more about what you sense may be happening in the U.S. and also how this could impact other jurisdictions, right? Because there's always jurisdictional arbitrage, and those regulators are like looking at each other, and they sometimes accelerate when they see another one being more innovative. Up to you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think it certainly has a lot of potential to be extremely bullish. I mean, having like the president of the US, you know, tweet on the whatever anniversary of the Bitcoin white paper of like, hey, and launching his own, you know, ICO. And,
He has a meme coin, right? Like, has his own coin.
Yeah, he's doing
Something
basically
like
an ICO right now.
Yeah,
Right? This,
very fun.
so I think in the end, if you have an SEC that's going to be crypto friendly, and then if you have like the US government buying Bitcoin, I think that can change a massive amount, right?
Okay.
Because so far it's been that the US has been one of the most restrictive places, right? So it's more like, oh, people went elsewhere to do stuff. And then I think other places maybe also became somewhat more strict. So if now the US goes like very pro-crypto, then I think that will make it much harder for other places to say, oh, we're also going to become restrictive or like apply more of these rules.
I tend to agree with you on this.
Yeah.
I'm based in Hong Kong, and I've seen that Hong Kong is always looking at what Singapore is doing. When Singapore is more innovative and more liberal, Hong Kong will change their stance. So totally agree. Louis, what about you? What do you think this election will change for staking services? Because it's really about like securities, right? Like what the industry has been claiming is that staking activities are not distribution of securities. And that's what Gensler was really about.
Yeah. I think if you look at this problem and you like take a step back, right? Broadly, we've just had a very restrictive environment, and it's been regulation by enforcement. And like he's mentioned, that caused companies to go offshore and do things that are, you know, outside the bounds of the regulator, and you know, you end up with a lot of things that you wish didn't happen in the industry, right? What I think is going to change is not just about just Trump, right? It's not just about whether he says vocally that he's going to support Bitcoin or this or that. It's about the entire cabinet. It's about the appointees. And we know that, you know, what's typical is to see an SEC chair resign, you know, sometime before the inauguration. So I would expect to see Gary Gensler gone before the end of January. Right?
Expect and hope.
Expect and hope, fingers crossed.
But I think he has the power to actually fire him.
And then you also
you
have
guys
things.
can try to hire him.
we're not going to hire him. And I think you also see people like Martin Gruenberg, chair of the FDIC, you know, who's largely known as being involved in, you know, Operation Choke Point 2.0 and pulling banking support for crypto companies. I think you see all of these things change in a massive regime change. What you also have is, once again, it's not supposed to be partisan, but unfortunately in the US it has been partisan to date. So you also have a Republican House, you have a Republican Senate, and you have a Republican presidency who are more aligned with the crypto community at large. And I think that you see when Gary steps down, when Martin Gruenberg is gone, I think you see people that are more friendly towards crypto. We passed FIT 21, which was a bipartisan proposal to delineate responsibilities between the CFTC and the SEC to publish a framework for delineating what is a security, what is a digital asset commodity, right? And I think you will see that it's in the review in the Senate now. The Republicans have a majority in the Senate. I think you see that pass. I think you see the president sign that into law. I think you start to see things like you have the bipartisan stablecoin bill that was proposed by Senator Lummis and Senator Gillibrand from New York. I think you see those things take off. I think you see a lot of innovation. And I think the biggest thing that I would say is just a mentality shift from us, you know, going after this industry, trying to delay it, trying to halt it, and listening to the likes of Elizabeth Warren and other people that are, you know, claim crypto is just for illegal transactions and so on, which is false. I think you see the U.S. step into a position of wanting to be a leader in the industry. And with that, I think you're going to see new laws be written, and I think you're going to see us start to take a more forward-facing, leaning forward kind of attitude with staking.
Thank you. Eric, I know you have slightly different views on this, on the outlook.
They're actually surprisingly in line.
Okay.
So, for full disclosure, we disagreed before the panel on something. But I think Louis has said it great. Like, things will improve. Wholesale, my caution is it's good to be optimistic, but you also have to have like the air of reality and about what the priorities are and so on and so forth. And so crypto tends to get bundled as one thing when it's a whole bunch of different things, and they have different priorities. And like the number one priority is going to be like asset reference tokens, so like stable coins. So that's definitely going to move forward. It wouldn't move forward anyway. And that, you know, we get 6 months into it, 1 year into it, all of a sudden some other emergency is going to come up, and then crypto is just going to be another thing over there. So yeah, less hostile for sure. pro-crypto, I don't know. Like, that's a strong word, right?
Specifically, you mentioned before this panel about how the SEC could continue enforcing cases despite more clarity in legislation.
Yeah, so you can change the head, which will change policy, right? But it won't change the rules, right? So you can, which rule am I going to enforce and how am I going to interpret it? But in the end of the day, the rules are still there, the legislation's still there. And so, and the vast majority of what they do pursue is actually fraudulent, or, the ones we complain about are these big ones that are egregious, right? Like Coinbase, right?
Okay.
But a lot of what they do is actually legit. And so, yeah, I mean, it's going to be better. It just may not be the panacea that everybody is seeing technicolors on,
So this is a very important point for the outlook, what's happening in the U.S. Maybe, Tal, you want to conclude on what you see as, and we'll finish with this, what you see as being a theme for 2025, 2026, for regulatory outlook, for also compliance outlook, for, as you said, tax rules, all those things actually do matter.
Actually, I want to talk a bit about Trump being elected.
Okay. Please do.
Because I think it is connected. As someone who doesn't live in the US, we've seen the US be kind of a backrunner when it comes to all the things regulation and compliance, and lots of companies migrate outside of the US, or at least some of their activities. And as someone who doesn't live in the US, I hope I'm talking for some of the people here, we are really looking forward to see what Trump administration will do in 2025, and hopefully start leading the pack. And then we might see other jurisdictions and other geographies be like, okay, if they are pushing forward, we might see some of the businesses go back to the US. How do we call and raise and go even further than the US? And all of this is great for the ecosystem. So hopefully that pushes us to a really good run.
Great. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for joining the panel. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.